After years of paying for my brother's education, I found out he had been lying to our relatives and calling me lazy, and the worst part was that my entire family believed him, ignoring the sacrifices I made for his future and happiness. I cheated on Sarah 3 weeks before our wedding. Not physically but emotionally, and somehow that feels worse because I had time to stop it and I didn't. I was messaging my ex Emma, telling her things I should have been telling my fiancé, complaining about wedding stress and how Sarah didn't understand me anymore. The worst part, I justified it by telling I was just venting to an old friend. But this isn't really about Emma. This is about why I was so desperate for validation from anyone except the woman who loved me enough to plan a future with me. This is about my brother Marcus and how I let him destroy everything good in while I was too busy playing hero to notice. For 8 years, I paid for Marcus's education, community university, then his master's degree in engineering, $127,000 total. I kept receipts for everything because I'm that kind of person. The responsible one, the one who fixes things, the one who sacrifices. I worked double shifts at the warehouse while he studied. I lived in a studio apartment while he got the nice dorm room. I drove a 15-year-old Honda while he had a decent car because, age matters for networking. I told it was temporary. When Marcus graduated and got his engineering job, he'd help me catch financially. Sarah and I could finally buy a house, start that family we'd been planning. I was 31, she was 29. We'd already waited longer than most of our friends because someone had to make sure Marcus succeeded. The first red flag should have been Thanksgiving 2 years ago. Marcus had just started his job making $78K right out of college. Good money, more than I'd ever made. But when Uncle Joe asked how he afforded such a nice apartment so quickly, Marcus laughed and said, "Hard work and smart choices. Some people just know how to prioritize." He looked right at me when he said it. I was sitting at the kids' table because there wasn't enough room at the main table, wearing a shirt with a small stain because I couldn't afford to replace it yet. Sarah squeezed my hand under the table, but I saw the look in her eyes, the same look I'd been seeing more often. Disappointment mixed with something that might have been pity. I should have said something then. Should have reminded everyone who paid for Marcus's smart choices. But I didn't want to embarrass him in front of the family. That's what I told anyway. Really, I was afraid they'd think I was petty for bringing money at dinner. The second red flag came 6 months later at cousin Rachel's wedding. Marcus was in the wedding party, looking sharp in his rented tux. During his speech he talked about overcoming obstacles, and proving that with dedication, anyone can rise above their circumstances. Aunt Linda actually teared. She grabbed my mom afterward and said, "Must be so proud of how Marcus turned his around all by himself." All by himself. Sarah heard it too. She'd been quiet during the drive home, staring out the passenger window. Finally she said, "Doesn't it bother that he never mentions help?" It did bother me. It bothered me so much I couldn't sleep that night. But I made excuses. He's young, he'll learn humility. Family doesn't keep score. I didn't do it for recognition. All lies I told because admitting the truth meant admitting I'd been played. The third red flag was Christmas last year. Marcus showed driving a brand new Audi. Not used, not certified, pre-owned, brand new. The 45,000 worth of German engineering sitting in my parents' driveway while I took the bus because my Honda finally died and I couldn't afford the repairs. "Early Christmas gift, he said, running his hand along the hood. I've been saving. The kid who I'd been supporting for 8 years, who'd never had a job longer than 3 months before graduation, had somehow saved a 45,000 in 18 months. Either he was lying or he was the most financially disciplined person on the planet. I knew which one was true. But the family ate it. Dad kept walking around the car, asking about features. Mom took pictures to show her friends. "My son the engineer," she kept saying, "my son," like I was invisible. Sarah didn't say anything until we got home to our 1-bedroom apartment with the heating that barely worked. She sat on our second-hand couch and finally exploded. "This is insane, David. Or 31 years old and living like 22 because been supporting brothers entire. And now he's buying luxury cars while can't even afford a decent winter coat." She was right. I'd been wearing the same winter coat for 6 years. The zipper was broken and the lining was torn. Sarah had offered to buy me a new one for Christmas, but I'd said we couldn't afford it. We couldn't afford it because every extra dollar I made went toward paying off the credit cards I'd maxed out keeping Marcus afloat during college. "He'll pay me back when he's settled," I said, but even I didn't believe it anymore. David. When? It's been 18 months since graduation. He's clearly settled enough for a new Audi. When is he going to start helping? I didn't have an answer because I'd never actually asked Marcus to pay me back. Never even brought the money except in vague terms about family helping family. I'd assumed he'd offer. I'd assumed wrong. That night, after Sarah in our kitchen looking at our bank statements, we had $347 checking, vers 200 in savings, and $18,000 in credit card debt. Most of that debt came from the last 2 years of Marcus's school, textbooks, rent assistance, groceries, gas money, car repairs, graduation expenses. I'd put it all on plastic telling it was temporary. Meanwhile, Marcus was probably sleeping in his fancy apartment, dreaming about his next upgrade. That's when I sent the first message to Emma. Just a simple, "How are?" at 20:17 a.m. She responded, "He's been a night owl." Before I knew it, we were talking about everything. How frustrated I felt. How invisible I'd become in my own family. How Sarah looked at me sometimes like I was a stranger. Emma listened. Emma understood. Emma didn't judge me for feeling sorry for her. Emma also didn't know about the $127,000 or the 8 years or the way my family treated me like furniture while celebrating Marcus like a conquering hero. She just heard a man who felt unappreciated, and she told me what I wanted to hear. "Deserve better," she said. "Or too good for people who don't see worth." I should have been having that conversation with Sarah. Sarah, who'd stood by me for 6 years, who'd postponed her own dreams to support mine, who'd never once complained about living in poverty so I could fund my brother's future. Sarah, who loved me despite everything. Instead, I was getting validation from my ex-girlfriend at 3 a.m. while my fiancé slept in the next room, probably dreaming about our wedding that I was already sabotaging with every message I sent. The worst part is, I knew what I was doing was wrong. I knew I was emotionally cheating. I knew I was betraying Sarah's trust, but Marcus's ingratitude had left me so hollow, so desperate for someone to acknowledge my sacrifices, that I couldn't stop from reaching out to anyone who would listen. I was so focused on being the hero of Marcus's story that I forgot I was supposed to be the hero of my own, and heroes don't cheat on their fiancées. Heroes don't let their brothers steal their thunder. Heroes don't end alone in apartments, wondering where it all went wrong. But I wasn't a hero. I was just a fool with good intentions and terrible, about to lose everything that mattered for a brother who'd never once said thank. Sarah found the messages on February 14th, Valentine's Day. Because of course she did. She'd been trying to plan something special despite our tight budget. She wanted to use my laptop to order takeout from our favorite restaurant, the one place we could still afford to splurge occasionally. The laptop was open to my messages with Emma. 6 weeks of conversations. 6 weeks of me telling another woman things I should have been telling my fiancé. I came home from work to find Sarah sitting at our kitchen table, my laptop closed in front of her, tears dried on her cheeks. She'd moved past crying and into that terrifying calm that comes before everything ends. Is there anything you want to tell me? She asked. I could have lied, should have lied. Instead, something in her voice made me crumble completely. I've been talking to Emma, I said. It's not physical. We haven't seen each other, but I know it's wrong and I know I've been emotionally cheating and I'm so sorry. She nodded like she'd expected this answer. Why? That one word destroyed me because I didn't have a good reason. I had excuses. I had justifications. I had a whole speech about feeling unappreciated and invisible and taken for granted. But I didn't have a reason that would make sense to someone who loved me. I don't know. I whispered. Yes, do. Her voice was steady, controlled. Been pulling away from me for months. Every time I try to talk about our future, change the subject. Every time I suggest we need to set boundaries with family about money, shut down. I've been avoiding dealing with problems by talking ex-girlfriend instead of fiancé. She was right. She was absolutely right, and hearing it out loud made me realize how badly I'd. The wedding is in 3 weeks, David. I've been planning our together while been planning escape route with Emma. Do you even want to marry me? Yes, I said immediately. Of course I do. Sarah, I love. This thing with Emma, it doesn't mean anything. It means everything. She stood from the table, and I noticed she wasn't wearing her engagement ring. It means rather share feelings with X than with me. It means when we're struggling, instinct is to run away instead of trying to fix what we have. I can fix this, I said desperately. I'll block Emma. I'll delete everything. We can go to counseling. Sarah shook her head. I've been thinking about this for hours and I keep coming back to the same question. If can lie to me about this, what else are lying about? My heart stopped. She knew. Somehow she knew about the money situation being worse than I'd admitted. About the credit cards. About how close we were to financial disaster because I'd never learned to say no to Marcus. The wedding costs $12,000, she said quietly. I've been budgeting for months trying to figure out how we'll pay for it. I've been eating ramen for lunch and walking to work to save gas money. Meanwhile, brother drives an Audi and are telling another woman about problems won't discuss with me. Sarah, please. I called off the wedding this morning. I already talked to the venue, the caterer, the photographer. We'll lose about $3,000 in deposits, but that's better than starting a marriage based on lies. The room started spinning. 3 weeks before our wedding, and she'd already made the decision to end everything. While I was at work, loading trucks and thinking about how to make things right, she was systematically dismantling our future. Can't just give on us, I said. I'm not giving. Gave months ago when decided Emma was a better confidant than fiancé. She went into our bedroom and came out with a suitcase. Packed. She'd been planning this conversation, preparing for this moment while I'd been stumbling through like an. I'm staying at my sister's for a while. I need space to think about whether this relationship can be salvaged. How long? I'd asked. I don't know. Maybe a long time. Maybe forever. She paused at the door. For what it's worth, I understand why you're angry about the Marcus situation. But instead of dealing with it like an had an emotional affair and lied to my face for 6 weeks. That tells me everything I need to know about character. The door closed behind her, and I was alone with the ruins of my. I called in sick the next day and spent 14 hours on the couch staring at my phone. I wanted to call Emma to tell her what happened, to get sympathy and validation and all the things that got me into this mess in the first place. Instead, I blocked her number and deleted all our conversations. Too little, too late, but it felt like the first honest thing I'd done in months. Then I called Marcus. Hey, what's he answered, cheerful and oblivious. I need to talk to about money, I said. There was a pause. What about money? The $127,000 I spent on education over 8 years. I need to know when planning to start paying me back. Another pause, longer this time. David, I never asked to pay for my school. Those 9 words hit me like a physical. 8 years of sacrifices. And that was his response. Not, I'm sorry, I didn't realize we're struggling. Just a flat denial of responsibility. I know, didn't ask. I said trying to keep my voice level. But I did pay. And I went into debt doing it. And now I need help. Look, I appreciate what did. But that was choice. I can't be responsible for decisions made without consulting me. Without consulting. We're 19 when this started. We're failing community college because couldn't afford textbooks. I stepped in to help family. And I'm grateful. But grateful doesn't mean I owe money. If wanted a loan, should have set terms from the beginning. I sat in stunned silence. This was my brother. The kid I'd practically raised after dad lost his job when Marcus was in high school. The person I'd sacrificed my entire to support. And he was talking to me like a stranger who'd made a bad investment. Marcus, I'm about to lose my apartment. My fiancée left me. I have $18,000 in credit card debt, most of it from helping. I'm asking for help. I'm sorry going through that, but I have my own expenses now. The Audi payment, rent, student loans for the small amount I did have to borrow. I can't take on debt too. Student loans for the small amount he had to borrow. He made it sound like he'd been mostly self-sufficient, like my contribution was minimal, like 8 years of my were a footnote. What about family helping family? I asked. That's what always said when needed money. That was different. I was a student then. Now I'm with responsibilities. I hung before I said something I'd regret. Then I called my mom. "Oh honey, I'm so sorry about the wedding," she said immediately. Apparently Sarah had called her too. But maybe this is a blessing in disguise. Two have seemed stressed lately. "Mom, did know I paid for Marcus's entire education?" "Well yes, of course. That was very generous but did know I went into debt doing it." A pause. "I thought had it under control. Did know Marcus bought a 45,000 car and refuses to help me pay off the credit cards I maxed out supporting him." Another pause, longer this time. "David, that doesn't sound like Marcus. Are sure not trading cause you're upset about Sarah." "Exaggerating. My own mother thought I was lying about my brother's selfishness." "Mom, I have receipts for everything. 8 years of receipts. 127,000 in total expenses." "Ani, I think might be conflating some of own expenses with what's spent on Marcus. Maybe should talk to someone about this. Been under a lot of stress." She didn't believe me. My own mother thought I was having some kind of breakdown and imagining my brother's ingratitude. After 8 years of watching me sacrifice everything for Marcus, she thought I was making it. I started to understand why Sarah left. If I was willing to let my family gaslight me about something this obvious, what else was I willing to lie to about? That night, I spread all the receipts out on my kitchen table and took pictures. Tuition payments, textbook rent assistance, grocery bills, gas money, car repairs, graduation expenses. Everything organized by year, everything documented. Then I created a group text with my parents, my aunt and uncle, and my 2 cousins. I sent them the photos along with a simple message. "This is what I spent supporting Marcus for 8 years. He refuses to help me pay off the debt I incurred doing this. I thought should know the real story behind his success." The responses came fast. "Dade, this isn't appropriate for a group text." "A mom, David, please don't do this when we're emotional." "Aunt Linda, I'm sure this is a misunderstanding." "Cousin Rachel, maybe guys should handle this privately." "Marcus, I can't believe you're trying to embarrass me like this." Not one of them acknowledged the receipts. Not one of them said, "Thank for sacrifice," or "I'm sorry you're struggling," or "Maybe we should help David." They were more concerned about Marcus' embarrassment than my financial. I realized then that Sarah was right about more than just the cheating. I'd been living in a fantasy where my family was worth sacrificing for, where being the responsible one mattered, where doing the right thing would eventually be recognized and rewarded. But they didn't see me as a hero. They saw me as a bank account with legs, someone who existed to solve problems and then disappear when it was time to celebrate success. And when I finally asked for help, I became the problem. The next morning, I woke to 12 missed calls from Marcus and a voicemail that started with, "What the is wrong with?" I didn't call him back. There was nothing left to say. Sarah texted me that afternoon, "I saw what happened with family, I'm sorry. But this is exactly what I mean about communication. Should have talked to me about how bad things were instead of talking to Emma." She was right. She was absolutely right. But she was also gone, and knowing she was right didn't bring her back. I was 31 years old, alone in an apartment I couldn't afford, with credit card debt that would take years to pay off and a family who'd rather pretend I was crazy than admit they'd used me. And somewhere across town, Marcus was probably explaining to his girlfriend how his dramatic older brother was having a breakdown and trying to steal credit for Marcus's self-made success. The worst part wasn't losing Sarah, though that felt like having my chest carved out with a rusty spoon. The worst part wasn't the debt or the apartment or even the isolation. The worst part was realizing that I'd done this too. I'd chosen Marcus over Sarah, over and over again, for 8 years. I'd chosen being his hero over being her partner. I'd chosen his future over our present. And when it all fell apart, I'd chosen Emma's validation over Sarah's trust. Every choice I'd made in the name of family and sacrifice had been wrong, and now I was paying the price for all of them at once. 6 months later, I was living in a studio apartment that smelled like mold and heating the kind of ramen that cost 25 cents per pack. My credit score had dropped to 480. Sarah was dating someone new. A guy from her work who probably didn't have a martyr complex and definitely didn't have $18,000 in credit card debt. I found out about Sarah's new relationship from Instagram, cause I was pathetic enough to still check her social media even though seeing her happy without me felt like swallowing glass. His name was Tom. He looked normal, stable, the kind of guy who probably had his finances in order and didn't emotionally cheat when things got stressful. They looked happy in the photos, really happy. The way Sarah and I used to look before I turned our relationship into a casualty of my war with reality. I'd been working overtime every week since the breakup, trying to pay down the debt, but the interest was me. Minimum payments barely covered what I owed, and every month the balance seemed to grow despite my efforts. I was trapped in a mathematical prison of my own making, and the walls were closing in. That's when I found out about the family dinner. My cousin Rachel posted about it on Facebook, a big family gathering at my parents' house to celebrate Marcus's promotion to senior engineer. The photos showed everyone there. My parents, aunt and uncle, cousins, even some family friends. Marcus in the center of it all, grinning and holding a bottle of champagne that probably cost more than my weekly food budget. I wasn't invited. 8 years of supporting this kid, and when he got promoted. Promotion that was only possible because I'd funded his education. Wasn't even invited to celebrate with him. The caption on Rachel's post said, "So proud of our self-made success story. Marcus proves that hard work and determination can overcome anything." Self-made. They were still calling him self-made. I screenshotted the post and sent it to Sarah, along with a message. "We're right about everything. I'm sorry it took losing for me to see it." She responded an hour later, "I know this is hard, but need to stop checking on me. We both need to move forward." Move forward. Easy to say when we're the one stuck in the past, paying interest on someone else's dreams. That weekend, I did something I'd sworn I wouldn't do. I drove to Marcus's apartment building, not to confront him but just to see how he was living. I needed to understand the full scope of my own stupidity. His building was nice, really nice. The kind of place with a doorman and a gym and probably a rooftop garden where young professionals sipped and talked about their stock portfolios. I sat in my car across the street, watching people come and go, all of them looking like they belonged in a world I'd never be able to afford. Marcus came out around 10 a.m., probably heading to brunch or some other activity that people with disposable income enjoy on Saturday mornings. He was wearing clothes I didn't recognize, expensive-looking clothes, designer jeans, a leather jacket that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He looked good, healthy, successful. Like someone who'd never had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. Like someone who'd never sacrificed anything for anyone. He got into his Audi and drove away, probably to meet friends who thought he was a self-made success story, who had no idea that his achievements were built on his brother's financial. I sat there for another hour, trying to figure out how I'd become the villain in a story, where I was supposed to be the hero. How had helping my brother turned into betraying my fiancée? How had being generous turned into being manipulated? How had doing the right thing led to losing everything that mattered? The answer was simple: I'd confused being needed with being loved. I'd thought that if I made indispensable to Marcus, he'd always appreciate me, always acknowledge my sacrifices, always treat me like family should treat each other. But people don't love their banks, they use them, and when they're done, they walk away without a backward glance. I'd been Marcus's bank for 8 years, and banks don't get invited to promotion dinners. That night, I wrote a letter I never sent, 23 pages of everything I'd wanted to say to my family but couldn't. About the receipts they'd ignored, the debt they'd dismissed, the years of my I'd given for Marcus's future. About how their silence had cost me the only relationship that ever really mattered. About how I'd rather have Sarah back than have their approval, but it was too late for either. Writing it felt good for about 5 minutes, then I remembered that no one would read it anyway, and if they did, they'd just think I was having another dramatic breakdown. The truth had become inconvenient for them, so they decided it wasn't true. I threw the letter away and opened a bottle of cheap whiskey instead. 2 weeks later, Marcus called me for the first time since our about the money. "David, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "About what?" "Mom told me been driving by my apartment." "That's not okay," are starting to scare people. I hadn't been back to his building since that one Saturday, but apparently someone had seen me and reported it to the family. Now I was in addition to being a liar and a drama queen. "I went there once," I said. "Once is too many. Look, I get that going through a hard time, but can't take it out on me. I didn't ask to sacrifice for my education." There it was again. The same line he'd been using since this all started. Like my sacrifices were a burden he'd never asked for instead of gifts he'd accepted eagerly for 8 years. Right, I said. Never asked, but never said no either, and never said thank. I did say thank, multiple times. When did ever thank me? A silence. Can't remember, Ken, because it never happened. Not once in 8 years did acknowledge what I was giving for point. That's not fair. I was focused on school. I was trying to build a future. With my money. We're building a future with my money. And now won't even help me pay off the debt I went into to make it happen. David, I'm sorry struggling, but I can't fix financial problems. Made those choices. I made those choices for family. I made those choices because I thought family mattered. It does matter, but that doesn't mean I owe money. I hung. There was no point in continuing a conversation with someone who lived in a completely different reality. That was the last time we spoke. 6 more months passed. Sarah got engaged to Tom on Christmas Eve. I saw it on Instagram again, because apparently I was committed to torturing. The ring was beautiful, bigger than the one I'd given her, probably because Tom could afford something nice without going into debt. She looked radiant in the photos, happier than I'd ever seen her, even during our best times, like she'd finally found someone who deserved her. I wished I could Tom, but he seemed like a decent guy, the kind of person who probably communicates with his partner, instead of seeking validation from ex-girlfriends. The kind of person who puts his relationship first instead of sacrificing it for ungrateful family members. The kind of person I should have been. I thought about sending Sarah a congratulations message, but I knew it would be selfish. She'd asked me to let her move forward, and the least I could do was respect that request. She deserved happiness, even if I wasn't part of it. Especially because I wasn't part of it. The debt was finally starting to decrease. I'd been living like a monk for almost a year, spending money only on absolute necessities, working every available overtime shift. At my current rate, I'd be debt-free in about 3 years. Still young enough to start over, maybe even find someone else who could love me despite my history of spectacularly bad decisions. But the loneliness was me. Not just romantic loneliness, though that was part of it. Complete social isolation. I'd lost Sarah, I'd lost my family, and I'd never been good at making friends outside of those relationships. My coworkers were friendly enough, but we didn't have much in common beyond our shared misery at the warehouse. I was 32 years old and completely alone in the world, surrounded by the wreckage of relationships I'd destroyed through my own stupidity. Last month I ran into my Aunt Linda at the grocery store. She saw me come in and tried to avoid eye contact, but I caught her before she could escape to another aisle. "Hi, Aunt Linda." "Oh, David." "Hello." She looked uncomfortable, like she was talking to someone with a contagious disease. "How's everyone doing?" "Good. Marcus got another promotion. He's doing very well." Oh, of course he was. Marcus was probably going to keep getting promoted until he was running the whole company, and everyone would keep calling him self-made while forgetting the brother who made it all possible. "That's great," I said, because what else was there to say? "Well, I should get going. Take care of David." She hurried away like I might ask her for money or start crying in the frozen food section. Like I was dangerous instead of just sad. That night, I looked online to see what my digital footprint looked like. There wasn't much. Few old social media posts, my LinkedIn profile that I hadn't updated in 2 years, some photos from Sarah's accounts that she hadn't bothered to delete. I looked like a ghost. Someone who'd existed briefly and then faded away, leaving barely any evidence of his presence in the world. Maybe that's what I deserved. Maybe this was the natural consequence of a spent trying to be important in other people's stories instead of being the protagonist of my own. I'd wanted to be Marcus's hero and ended being his victim. I'd wanted to be Sarah's provider and ended being her betrayer. I'd wanted to be my family's savior and ended being their embarrassment. Now was nobody's anything, and maybe that was better than being everybody's disappointment. But God, the silence was deafening. Tomorrow I'll go to work, load trucks for 8 hours, come home to my studio apartment, heat some ramen, and go to bed. Same routine I've followed for almost a year now. Same routine I'll probably follow for the next 3 years while I pay off the debt from my brother's education. The brother who's probably planning his wedding now, or buying a house, or doing all the things I should have been doing with Sarah if I'd made better choices. The brother who'll probably invite the whole family to celebrate his major events while I spend them alone, eating 25-cent noodles and wondering how it all went so wrong. But I know how it went wrong. I spent 8 years funding someone else's dreams and then betrayed the only person who actually loved me while I was doing it. I chose Marcus over Sarah until Sarah was gone, and then I chose pride over humility until Marcus was gone too. Now I'm exactly where I belong, alone with the consequences of my choices, counting the cost of trying to buy love from people who were never going to sell it. The worst part isn't the debt or the loneliness or even losing Sarah. The worst part is knowing that somewhere out there, my brother is living his best on the foundation I built for him, and he sleeps just fine at night because he genuinely believes he earned every bit of his success, while I lie awake calculating interest payments and wondering if the people sacrifice everything for are supposed to notice when disappear from their lives entirely.